Imagine walking into a royal chamber so putrid, the stench of death hits you like a wall before your eyes even adjust. A once proud king, reduced to a rotting, decaying corpse, his body betraying every ounce of hope and ambition that the throne had placed upon him. This was the final sight of Edward VI, Henry VIII's great hope for the Tudor dynasty, just moments before he drew his last breath. Edward VI, born into a kingdom that had waited decades for a male heir, was supposed to be the salvation of his father's brutal reign. But what if the truth was darker than anyone could imagine? This boy king, celebrated and revered, spent his final days in a grotesque, debilitating decline. His body, once a symbol of royal promise, was rotting from within, and the details of his tragic end would shock the world. Are you ready to uncover the horrifying truth of Edward VI's final moments? If you think you can handle the shocking details, hit that subscribe button now. And if you're still unsure, leave a comment below and tell us why you wouldn't dare subscribe to this dark tale. Trust us, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Henry VIII had long been desperate for a male heir, willing to sacrifice kingdoms, faith, and even the lives of his wives to ensure the Tudor dynasty would continue. His first marriage to Catherine of Aragon had failed to produce the much-needed son. His second marriage, to Anne Boleyn, ended in betrayal and tragedy. It wasn't until his third wife, Jane Seymour, endured 30 hours of agonizing labor that the long-awaited son was born. Edward VI, a boy who was supposed to be England's salvation, was finally here. When the news spread, England erupted in a frenzy of jubilation. Bonfires were lit across London, bells rang in every church, and the streets were filled with cheering crowds. Henry VIII, a king known for his ruthless ambition, wept openly in front of the people, his joy overflowing as his long-held dream was realized. This was it. The male heir who would secure his bloodline, his legacy, and his kingdom. Yet, in the midst of the celebrations, one could already feel the shadow of a tragic future looming over this newborn prince. For Edward, the great hope, had no way of knowing that he was born into a world of intense pressure, political chaos, and, most disturbingly, a body already set to betray him. As the months passed, the young prince's frail constitution became apparent. Henry's joy soon turned to a growing anxiety, for despite the grandeur of the birth, it was clear that Edward was not the robust, unbreakable heir his father had hoped for. The image of the strong Tudor king would never materialize in Edward VI. From the very first moment he took breath, Edward's body was already failing him. How could this royal infant, so celebrated and adored by the people, be destined for such an agonizing decline? The very foundations of the Tudor dynasty had rested on this boy's shoulders, only to be crushed beneath the weight of fate. What caused his tragic fate? Was it fate itself, or something darker lurking in the shadows of his birth? If you're already shocked by how history can twist itself into dark paths, subscribe to Disturbing Tale right now. If not, let's hear your thoughts on why you won't join this Disturbing Tale community in the comments below. From the moment of his birth, it became clear that Edward VI was not the perfect heir that England had longed for. Despite his title, despite his noble lineage, Edward's body betrayed him at every turn. As a child, he was frequently ill, fevers, coughs, and mysterious rashes that would have sent anyone else to their grave. His weak constitution became apparent early on, and those who surrounded him, particularly Henry VIII, began to see the grim truth: this child was fragile, his body barely capable of holding the weight of his royal birthright. Henry, devastated by the loss of his beloved wife Jane Seymour just days after Edward's birth, was determined to protect his son. The young prince was carefully shielded from the outside world, his nursery scrubbed daily with vinegar, servants and courtiers forced to wash their hands with rosewater before even entering his presence. Every precaution was taken to ensure Edward remained safe from disease. Yet, as history would soon reveal, these efforts, intended to safeguard him, ironically did more harm than good. The very overprotection that Henry had imposed upon his son, keeping him isolated from the natural world, only weakened Edward's immune system further. Edward was kept in an antiseptic bubble, away from other children, isolated from the germs that could have helped build his immunity. While other children played in the streets and mingled with the common folk, Edward remained within the confines of Hampton Court, surrounded by royal physicians and strict protocols designed to keep disease at bay. His body was not allowed to fight, not allowed to adapt to the dangers of the world. The result? He became more susceptible to disease, more fragile by the day. At the age of 4, Edward was already falling ill with what was described as quartans, likely a form of malaria. His body, though a royal masterpiece on the outside, was slowly deteriorating from within. His health problems became a constant source of anxiety for Henry VIII, but the truth could not be hidden for long. Despite Henry's best efforts to protect his son, fate was already sealed. Edward was cursed with a frailty that no amount of royal precautions could change. It wasn't long before this once promising heir, whose birth had sparked celebrations across the nation, began to fade into the background. The court may have still seen him as a king in waiting, but his body saw him as nothing more than a fragile vessel, one destined to crumble under the pressures of his own existence. The so-called perfect heir was doomed from the very moment he entered this world. From the start, Edward was not the king the Tudors had hoped for. His body had been weak, his health in constant decline, and the endless measures to protect him had only made him more vulnerable. What was supposed to be a future of power, glory, and strength instead led to a boy's unrelenting suffering, both physical and emotional. And this is only the beginning of Edward's tragic journey. Can you handle the weight of this tragic history? Subscribe to Disturbing Tale now if you want to learn how a kingdom's greatest hope crumbled in the face of destiny. Or leave a comment explaining why you would rather stay in the dark, ignoring the truth behind the Tudor throne. By the time Edward VI was 12, the royal heir, once full of promise and the symbol of Tudor strength, was a mere shadow of the boy who had been born with so much hope. What had once been a strong, youthful frame had now become a grotesque reflection of the disease eating away at his body. It began with the cough, a violent, racking cough that rattled his chest, spitting out blood and pus, the early symptoms of what would later be known as tuberculosis. The boy king, who had once dazzled courtiers with his intelligence and presence, now found himself coughing up his own flesh, chunks of decaying tissue that the most seasoned Tudor physicians couldn't even comprehend. The symptoms quickly spiraled from there. Edward's body, once a symbol of health, became a living horror. His legs, swollen to twice their normal size, could no longer carry him. The skin stretched tight, straining against the unbearable pressure, cracking and splitting open in places. Underneath, the flesh was decaying, exposed to the air, allowing the terrible stench of death to emanate from his body. The royal physicians, unable to provide any real cure, resorted to leeches, bleeding, and other barbaric practices that, instead of alleviating his suffering, only made his condition worse. Yet, in a kingdom obsessed with appearances, it became imperative to keep up the illusion. Edward, despite his agony, was forced to sign documents, his hands swollen with edema, barely able to grasp the quill. His body had become a prisoner to the throne, yet the political machinery continued to turn. The boy king's suffering wasn't limited to his legs. His ulcers, which had initially appeared as small sores, had now become deep, festering wounds. These open sores oozed foul-smelling pus, discharging fluids that no amount of medicine could control. His breathing became labored, the blood-stained coughs growing more frequent and violent. His lungs, once strong enough to deliver speeches in Latin and Greek, were now failing him, literally dissolving inside his chest. But it wasn't just his lungs and legs that were betraying him. His internal organs had begun to fail as well. The liver, normally a deep reddish brown, had turned a sickly yellow-green, crumbling under the touch of the physician's hands. His heart, the symbol of royal courage, was enlarged and riddled with lesions. Edward's body, in its final moments, was a walking testament to the utter collapse of the human form. The death of the once strong boy king wasn't sudden. It was a prolonged, agonizing journey. Each day, Edward's body deteriorated further. His once bright hair fell out in clumps, leaving patches of bare scalp covered with sores. His nails, once perfectly manicured, turned black and began to detach from their beds. His fever grew, pushing him further into delirium. Yet still, the court insisted he was improving, a facade built on lies and denial. But what did Edward's doctors find inside his decaying body after death? The truth is far worse than anyone could have imagined. What they uncovered would shock even the most seasoned physicians of the time. The very organs that were meant to sustain him had failed in ways so grotesque that even the best medical minds of the era could not have predicted such a horrific end. The revelation of Edward's body, opened for the first time after his death, revealed a kingdom in complete denial. How could a boy so revered, so celebrated, be brought so low? The answer lies within his body, rotting, decaying, and unable to hold together even in the grave. What did they find inside? The truth is so horrifying, it could never have been revealed to the public at the time. Don't just watch history unfold in front of you, dive into it with us. If you're brave enough to face the brutal truth of Edward VI's suffering and death, hit that subscribe button and join us on this disturbing journey. And if you're not ready to take that step, leave a comment telling us why you'd rather stay in the dark about what history hides from us. As Edward's health worsened, the political landscape surrounding him began to shift from one of desperation to outright denial. Despite his deteriorating state, the Tudor dynasty, desperate to maintain its grip on power, could not afford the truth to leak out. The boy king's suffering had to remain hidden from the public eye, the truth buried beneath layers of royal propaganda. The kingdom's political structure, already fragile after Henry VIII's death, now faced the terrifying possibility of complete collapse. In the grand halls of the palace, Edward's condition was carefully concealed. Reports about the king's health were deliberately falsified. The royal physicians, bound by duty and fear, created a narrative of hope and recovery. The king is improving, they told the court. His recovery is imminent. The grand facade of royal health was being carefully constructed with lies, spun so expertly that even foreign ambassadors were duped into believing Edward was on the mend. But behind closed doors, those who attended to the king's needs, servants, courtiers, and physicians, knew the terrifying truth. Edward VI was not recovering. He was decaying. His body was being consumed by disease, and his mind was slipping into delirium. His lungs, full of blood and putrid fluid, were slowly drowning him. His legs, grotesquely swollen, were now nearly immobile, yet still, the court proclaimed that he was improving. In public, Edward was still the king, still the heir to the Tudor throne, though no one in the kingdom had ever been more aware of the falsehoods. Courtiers, desperate to maintain the image of royal dignity, went so far as to have actors stand in for Edward during public appearances. Royal portraits, which once captured his regal features, now displayed a false image, one that showed a healthy, vibrant king, not the ghostly, decaying figure he had become in the privacy of his chambers. The political forces surrounding Edward also played a crucial role in maintaining the illusion. John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, a man of ruthless ambition, feared the consequences of Edward's death. If the young king were to die, his Catholic half-sister Mary would claim the throne. Northumberland and his allies, knowing this, began to devise a dangerous plan to place Lady Jane Grey, a Protestant, on the throne, bypassing both Mary and Elizabeth. To protect this political maneuver, they needed the facade of a healthy king. They needed the world to believe that Edward was still the ruler of England, even as his body rotted from within. The Tudor propaganda machine swung into full motion, carefully curating every detail of Edward's appearance and health to maintain the illusion. And so, even as Edward's body was decaying in front of them, a kingdom in denial worked tirelessly to spin his death into a royal narrative of dignity and divine destiny. What was once a story of hope had now become a dark, cruel cover-up. The king's body was crumbling, yet the world continued to see him as a living, breathing monarch, fit to rule. But what was the cost of this deception? The truth was hidden away, buried in the shadows of the court. What did it mean for a kingdom to live in such denial? Even while Edward's flesh was rotting, his death was spun into the fabric of royal grandeur. The myth of the healthy king persisted, fooling the court and the kingdom, even as the body of their monarch fell apart. The doctors, political figures, and courtiers who surrounded Edward were complicit in maintaining this horrific illusion. But what price would they pay for hiding the truth? If you think Tudor England was just about crowns and glory, wait until you see the dark truth they tried to keep hidden. Subscribe to Disturbing Tale to uncover what history has swept under the rug. Or leave a comment and tell us why you can't handle the truth of what really happened to Edward VI. Edward VI's final days were nothing short of a horror. By this point, the royal court had created a perfect illusion of control, but behind closed doors, the reality was far darker. The boy king, who once promised so much for England, was now a shell of his former self. His body had surrendered completely to disease. His legs, swollen beyond recognition, could no longer carry him. He was immobile, confined to his bed, unable even to sit up without assistance. His once vibrant eyes, full of ambition and promise, now reflected only pain and confusion. His body, ravaged by tuberculosis, was barely able to keep him alive. Those who had attended him in his final months would later describe the haunting scene of a boy trapped in his own flesh, a mind still sharp, yet a body that refused to cooperate. His skin, once fair and youthful, had turned a ghostly pallor. His cheeks hollowed out, the veins in his face clearly visible beneath his skin. His lips were cracked and parched from the constant vomiting of blood and bile, his breath labored and weak, as if he was constantly gasping for the breath that his lungs could no longer provide. The intense fever that had once come and gone was now constant. His temperature spiked so high that his attendants could no longer touch him without gloves. His physicians, though experts in the medical practices of the time, were helpless in the face of such overwhelming decay. There were no treatments, no cures. Only futile measures to ease his suffering, which, as it turned out, only added to the torment. Bloodletting, blistering, and other cruel treatments were employed to no effect, leaving Edward in even more agony as his body gave in to the ravages of the disease. One of his closest servants, who had cared for him through these final days, recalled how Edward, though too weak to speak, would sometimes try to lift his hand to write. His fingers, swollen and stiff, could barely grasp the quill, and yet, he tried. He wanted to leave behind something, anything, that would prove he had lived, that he had been a king. But his strength failed him, and the ink stains on the paper were the only remnants of a king too sick to rule, too frail to even hold a pen. In these last moments, the emotional reflections of those around him were raw and haunting. They had seen this boy grow from an innocent child into a young monarch, and now, they were forced to witness his slow, painful demise. His physicians, once proud and capable, were now reduced to silent observers, powerless in the face of such extreme suffering. Even his court, who had once celebrated his birth with wild joy, now turned their backs in a mixture of fear and denial. Witnesses described the air in the room as suffocating. The stench of illness and death permeated every corner of his chambers, no matter how many herbs were burned or incense was offered. The very smell of his body deteriorating was so overpowering that servants had to rotate every hour, unable to bear it for long. The boy king, once England's great hope, was now a dying child, abandoned by everyone except a handful of devoted servants who remained to care for him. And then came his last breath, the breath that marked the end of a young life, full of potential but stolen by fate and illness. When Edward VI died, his body was already a shadow of its former self, a husk of what had once been a vibrant and intelligent boy king. But what they found inside his decaying body was beyond belief. The truth about what had happened to Edward's organs, to his very flesh, would be revealed in the most brutal and shocking way imaginable. A royal autopsy, hidden from public view, uncovered a level of degradation that shocked even the most hardened physicians of the time. His organs, his heart, his lungs, his liver, had been ravaged beyond recognition, decaying inside his body long before he had passed. The official records would attempt to cover this up, but the horrifying truth had already been revealed. As the final moments of his life passed, Edward VI, though suffering immensely, was still conscious enough to understand the political chaos that would follow his death. His mind, still sharp, grasped the implications of what would come next. His Catholic half-sister Mary would rise to the throne. But even as he fought to stay alive, the fate of the throne was being manipulated by those around him. The struggle for power didn't stop with his death, it intensified. In his final moments, Edward's body had already become a battlefield, not only for his life but for the future of the entire Tudor dynasty. The final moments of Edward VI were not just a tragic end to a young life, they were a dark, hidden story of political power, personal suffering, and denial. If you think you can handle the truth behind his agonizing death, subscribe to Disturbing Tale. If you can't bear the weight of this story, let us know in the comments why you'd rather ignore the true horror of Edward's last days. After Edward VI passed, his body, already decaying beyond recognition, was quickly subjected to the royal embalming process, an attempt to preserve his image, both for posterity and for the political narrative that had been carefully constructed. But in the quiet, shadowy chambers where the embalming took place, the full extent of Edward's deterioration was exposed for the first time. As the royal embalmers went to work, they would have been horrified by what they found. His lungs, once vital organs, were now unrecognizable. They had dissolved into a mass of putrid, liquefied tissue, soaked in blood and pus. The cavities where healthy lungs should have been were filled with dark, fetid fluid that sloshed around when touched. The air in the room was thick with the overpowering stench of decay, a smell so revolting that even the most seasoned medical professionals recoiled at the sight. The once proud lungs of the king had deteriorated into an almost unidentifiable mass of corruption, a stark contrast to the royal portraits that had once depicted him as the picture of health. The heart, that symbol of strength and vitality, had swelled to nearly twice its normal size, riddled with lesions and damaged beyond any hope of repair. Its once powerful beats had been silenced long before Edward's death. Now, the heart was a grotesque, shriveled organ, unrecognizable to the trained eyes of those who performed the autopsy. Every layer of tissue that should have been firm and strong had turned soft and disintegrated. Then there was the liver, an organ that should have been a rich, deep reddish-brown, full of life and function. Instead, it had become a sickly yellow-green, crumbling under the lightest touch. It was as if Edward's body had been consumed from the inside out, the organs betraying him in a grotesque display of nature's cruelty. The embalming process, typically an effort to maintain the dignity of the deceased, was in this case futile. The embalmers, overwhelmed by the extent of Edward's decomposition, turned to all manner of preservatives to slow the inevitable breakdown. They used spices, resins, and oils, substances that were meant to mask the smell and preserve what remained of the king's body. But these efforts only served to make the situation worse. The body swelled rapidly, bloating as gases built up inside, creating a grotesque spectacle of royal dignity slipping away. The embalming process, which was supposed to protect the legacy of a monarch, instead revealed the full extent of Edward's suffering. Every incision made to preserve his body, every effort to maintain an image of royal composure, only uncovered the horror beneath. It became clear that no amount of preservation could stop the truth of Edward's suffering from emerging. His body had already become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in his short, tragic life. The royal efforts to protect the dynasty's image had only added to the horror surrounding Edward's death. The embalming process, a final attempt to preserve the boy king's image for future generations, only unveiled the grotesque state of his decaying organs. What the court had hoped would be a dignified, respectful send-off instead became a macabre spectacle. His body, once a symbol of hope and strength, was now reduced to nothing more than a decaying, putrid shell. And as the embalmers worked, the political forces that had used Edward's frail body as a tool for their own ambitions were left to wrestle with the ugly reality that the king they had hoped to present to the world was already gone. If you think that royal embalming could preserve a king's dignity, think again. Edward VI's body was already beyond saving, and the truth that was hidden from the world is nothing short of horrifying. If you can handle the full scope of this dark tale, subscribe to Disturbing Tale. Or, if you can't face what really happened, leave a comment explaining why you'd rather live in denial of history's darkest truths. Edward VI's death was not just the end of a young monarch, it marked the beginning of an unparalleled political crisis that would rock England to its very core. As the news of Edward's passing spread, so too did the scramble for power. The Tudor dynasty, built on violence, deceit, and ambition, was teetering on the edge of collapse. The death of the boy king, who had barely ruled for 6 years, left a power vacuum, one that would soon be filled with ruthless ambition, treachery, and bloodshed. The court, already divided by conflicting factions, found itself at the mercy of political maneuvering and backroom deals. Edward's death created a gaping hole in the royal succession, and the court could no longer afford to ignore the question of who would inherit the throne. The device for the succession, the official document that would decide who would sit on the throne, had already been set into motion during Edward's final days, under the heavy hand of John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland. Edward, despite his frailty, had been coerced into signing the document, an act that would ultimately place Lady Jane Grey, the granddaughter of Henry VIII's sister, on the throne. Northumberland, driven by his Protestant loyalties and his desire for power, saw this as the only way to maintain control of England's future. The Catholic Mary, daughter of Henry VIII's first wife Catherine of Aragon, was seen as a threat to the Protestant reforms that had taken hold during Edward's reign. And so, Northumberland pushed for Lady Jane Grey, a figure who could easily be manipulated by those in power. As Edward's body was still cooling in the royal chamber, Northumberland's plot was already set in motion. But what he failed to account for was the deep, underlying tension that had been simmering beneath the surface of Tudor England for years. The true heir to the throne, Mary, would not be denied. Her claim, despite being Catholic, was rooted in bloodline and birthright, and she had the support of key figures in the kingdom. The political chaos that ensued after Edward's death was like a feverish storm, one that no one, not even the cunning Northumberland, could control. The nobility was split, some swearing allegiance to the young Lady Jane, others to the rightful Queen Mary. The streets of London became battlegrounds, where soldiers and loyalists fought for control of the kingdom's future. And all the while, Edward's death was the spark that ignited the flames of religious and political conflict that would soon engulf the entire nation. Edward's death didn't just signal the end of a boy king, it was the beginning of a political nightmare that would shake the throne of England to its very foundation. The power struggles that followed Edward's death were more than a battle for the throne, they were a fight for the soul of England itself. The throne of England was now a symbol of chaos and bloodshed, a prize that many wanted but no one could truly control. The consequences of Edward's death would stretch far beyond the immediate political fallout. The succession crisis, which began with the failed attempt to place Lady Jane Grey on the throne, would escalate into one of the bloodiest chapters in English history. The repercussions of this crisis would resonate throughout England for years to come, leaving a nation divided, scarred, and haunted by the consequences of royal ambition. Edward VI's death wasn't just a tragedy for a young boy, it was the spark that ignited a political firestorm. If you can stomach the brutal truth of what followed, subscribe to Disturbing Tale. But if you'd rather remain blind to the horrifying fallout from Edward's death, let us know in the comments why you can't face the truth of England's bloody history. The death of Edward VI was not just a personal tragedy, it was a crisis that shook the very foundations of the Tudor dynasty. But the horrors didn't end with his death. After the boy king passed, the royal family, in their desperate attempt to protect the image of the Tudor line, decided that Edward's burial would be anything but ordinary. They had to contain the horror, conceal the truth, and ensure that no one, especially the public, could ever see the extent of the decay that had ravaged the young king's body. The coffin that would hold Edward's remains was sealed not once, but multiple times. First, a lead coffin was used, a material chosen for its supposed ability to preserve the body and keep the stench of decay contained. But it wasn't enough. A wooden coffin was placed inside the lead one, and then, another layer of lead was sealed around the wooden one. The royals wanted to ensure that even the smallest hint of decay would remain hidden, that nothing would seep out and reveal the gruesome truth of what had happened inside Edward's body. Even the funeral procession was shrouded in secrecy. The ceremonial details, which would have normally been a grand public event, were hurriedly scaled back. The coffin, already weighing several times its normal weight due to the multiple layers, was carried by 8 of the strongest men in the royal guard. It was reported that these men struggled to carry it, their efforts only highlighting the unnatural heaviness of the sealed coffin. The pallbearers, their faces twisted in discomfort, carried the coffin with an urgency that reflected the fear and anxiety of those involved in the burial. The secrecy surrounding Edward's final resting place was not just to protect the royal image, it was to keep the truth from being discovered. The location of the grave itself was kept from the public eye. When the coffin was lowered into the tomb at Westminster Abbey, it was done with remarkable haste, as though the royal family feared that time itself was closing in on them. The grave, once filled, was immediately sealed with heavy stone and mortar, permanent barricades meant to prevent anyone from ever uncovering what lay beneath. But this wasn't just about keeping the physical remains contained. The royal family had an even greater fear. The tomb itself had become a source of mystery and suspicion, as strange occurrences began to emerge in the days following the burial. Guards stationed near the tomb reported hearing unsettling sounds, soft, faint noises that seemed to emanate from the sealed chamber. Some claimed it sounded like the shifting of bones inside the coffin, while others swore it was the muffled cries of the king, trapped in his eternal prison. The sounds were so disturbing that they were quickly dismissed and hushed up, but whispers persisted. The rumors that Edward's decaying body still lingered in the tomb, calling out for release, spread like wildfire. The fear that something unnatural was happening to the royal tomb led to more secrecy, more cover-ups. The political machine of the Tudor dynasty worked overtime to suppress these rumors, doing everything they could to keep the details of Edward's burial hidden from the public. What they did to contain the horrors of Edward's decaying body remains one of the most disturbing royal cover-ups in history. The elaborate measures taken to preserve the illusion of a dignified, royal burial only served to deepen the mystery surrounding Edward's death. The sealed coffins, the hasty burial, and the strange sounds emanating from the tomb all point to a truth so disturbing that it would be buried along with him for centuries. The cover-up didn't end with his body. The Tudor dynasty, already on shaky ground, used every tool at their disposal to maintain the myth of royal power and control. Edward's death, though cloaked in secrecy, would haunt the royal family for years to come. And the question remains, what secrets lie buried with Edward VI, and what did those who witnessed his final days truly know? The horrors of Edward VI's burial are not just part of a dark chapter in history, they're part of a cover-up that still raises questions today. If you can handle the disturbing reality of what really happened, subscribe to Disturbing Tale. Or, if you're still unsure about confronting the truth, leave a comment below and tell us why you wouldn't dare face the truth of the royal cover-up. Edward VI, a boy who was once hailed as the savior of the Tudor dynasty, left behind a legacy that was anything but triumphant. His life, marked by ill health and a tragic decline, became a chilling reminder of the fragility of royal power and the futility of human ambition. He was the golden hope of a kingdom that had desperately awaited a male heir for decades, and yet, from the moment of his birth, it seemed as though fate had already sealed his tragic end. What should have been a reign of strength and prosperity instead became a symbol of how even the mightiest dynasties could crumble under the weight of their own dreams. Henry VIII's obsession with securing a male heir, his desperation to protect his bloodline, culminated in the suffering and untimely death of his only surviving son. Edward's body, weakened from birth, his health deteriorating year by year, was the tragic casualty of a father's unrelenting pursuit of power. But the real horror of Edward's story lies not only in his suffering but in what his death revealed about the nature of royal power. The political manipulations that surrounded his decline, the efforts to mask the truth, to protect the image of the crown, and to secure the throne at all costs, showed the lengths to which those in power would go to maintain their grip. Edward VI was never allowed to live a life free of the chains of royal expectation. From his birth to his death, his life was molded and manipulated by those around him. His body, already fragile, became a battleground for the throne, and his suffering, though hidden from the world, was used as a tool in the power struggle. As history moves forward, Edward's legacy remains one of unanswered questions. Was his premature death truly the result of the tuberculosis that ravaged his body, or was there something more sinister at play? The possibility of poisoning has long been speculated, though modern experts have largely dismissed this theory in favor of natural causes. But in the context of a time rife with political intrigue, with powerful factions vying for control, could it have been something more? The question remains unanswered, adding a layer of mystery to an already tragic story. What we do know is that Edward VI's death, and the years leading up to it, left a scar on England's political and cultural landscape. His death became a pivotal moment in the history of the Tudor dynasty, one that would shift the power dynamics of the entire kingdom. His successor, the Catholic Mary I, would take the throne, undoing much of what Edward had achieved in his short life. The Protestant reforms he had championed would be reversed, and the kingdom would be thrown into religious turmoil once again. Edward's death, then, didn't just mark the end of a life, it marked the beginning of a tumultuous period for England. The political machinations that followed his demise, the struggle for control between his half-sisters, and the fate of the Tudor line all grew out of the tragic events surrounding Edward's final days. And so, we are left with questions that continue to haunt us. How much of Edward's suffering was truly necessary? How much was caused by the political machinery surrounding him? Could his life have been saved with modern medicine, or was he simply doomed from birth? These are the questions that linger in the shadows of history, unanswered and unsettling. You've just witnessed one of the most disturbing royal stories in history, a tale of ambition, suffering, and political intrigue that changed the course of England's future. If you don't want to miss what's next, subscribe now and join us for more disturbing tales. Or, if you'd rather stay in the dark and ignore the truth, leave a comment explaining why you're not joining us on this haunting journey.